It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. This country is not divided. I'm going to try to make this case today. Everybody, right, left, and center, in the media is telling you, just drumming this into your head, that we are a divided nation, 50-50. More divided than ever. It's just not true. The country's not divided. It looks divided. It gives every indication because of election results, but I'm going to make the case that that's mostly due to voter suppression, misinformation and disinformation campaigns, problems with polls, exit polls, pre-election polls. Of course, there's gerrymandering and the Electoral College. Oh my God, we all know about that. But when it comes down to the issues themselves, when you ask Americans how they feel about things, we largely agree. Of course we're divided. I mean, we don't agree on everything. Of course not. But if we had an election and one candidate won 70% to 30% on the popular vote, wouldn't we call that a landslide? Of course we would. And when we look at the issues that Americans agree on, they often run into that 70% mark. Some of them in the 60s, many in the 70s, many of them as much as 80 to 90% agreement. Issues like minimum wage, Medicare for all, gun safety, net neutrality, things like this. We agree. We're not that divided. And where we are divided, those divisions are pronounced. They're highlighted by a media that's driven by conflict. They're highlighted because some people in this country have a lot more power than other people, and they're able to exercise that power because they have the means. So even though they'll hold a minority view, they've got the money and the infrastructure to manipulate public opinion, to manipulate the media, to manipulate elections. All right, so let's break this down. America is not divided. That's what I'm saying today. And you might say, well, we just had an election. Look at the numbers. It's 50-50. Right down the middle. Congress, the White House, razor thin, right? Razor thin margins. That's what we keep hearing. We got the numbers right in front of us. We're looking at them on our TV boxes. No denying it. Well, let's look at voter suppression for a minute. Now, of course, all we're hearing about now is voter fraud. And that's been the same story since forever. People shouting about voter fraud, but they can't find it, they can't prove it. And when they actually do look for it, when we find it, and we do find it, you're always going to find some voter fraud, a case here and a case there. But it's always anecdotal. It's never systemic. It's never widespread. It's never enough to turn an election. It's one or two cases here and there. You could even find up to 100 or a couple hundred. That's not going to change an election that was decided by 20,000 or 40,000 votes, or even 10,000 or even 2,000. What fraud does exist is anecdotal. It's 0.000 whatever something percent that they tell us when they actually do the research on this. Now, on the other side of this is voter suppression. And there again, here in the media and from the spinners and from the liars and the cheaters, they want you, in your mind, to put voter suppression and voter fraud on an equal footing. Well, one side tries to suppress the vote. The other side tries to vote fraudulently. 50-50. It just couldn't be further from the truth. Voter suppression is well documented, widespread. Things like voter ID, where Republicans have come right out and admitted that voter ID laws are aimed to suppress the Democratic vote. And well coordinated. Starting years and years ago, every Republican state legislature got on board with the Koch brothers and ALEC and started passing the same law in state after state. Study after study shows that voter ID laws disenfranchise mostly poor people and people of color. We've seen for years, and certainly highlighted in our most recent election, the reduction of polling sites, drastic reductions, drop boxes, that crazy case in Texas where millions of people in Houston had exactly one drop box. One. Republicans are always fighting against early voting, trying to limit that. And they come right out and admit it. And then there's the real behind-the-scenes stuff that when a Republican governor and a Republican legislature get hold of a state, now you got massive voter registration purges. If you're not familiar with the work of Greg Palast, you need to Google up Greg Palast and read what he's doing. This is his mission, investigative journalist. Many books, many articles, many in-depth investigations on voter registration purges, where they take thousands and thousands of names off of voter rolls in the guise of updating or modernizing or something, but they selectively purge voters of color, voters from largely Democratic areas. Again, suppression on one side, fraud on the other. You're not going to find fraud anywhere except for those anecdotal cases. Suppression, you're going to find reams of proof. You're going to find quotes from Republicans themselves. It's been shown clearly that the Orange Menace was openly trying to sabotage mail service. The Postal Service Inspector General report showed it. The Orange Menace himself admitted it on several occasions, that he wanted to starve the U.S. Postal Service to destroy mail-in voting because he didn't want mail-in voting. Unfounded charges about how mail-in voting is corrupt, when of course it's not, and it's been around since the Civil War. There's the whole thing about felons. That's another community that the Republicans don't want voting. Ex-felons were supposed to get the vote in Florida. That's what the voters decided. But the Republican power structure and state government put the kibosh on that, created basically a poll tax where ex-felons have to pony up for any unpaid court fees or fines. The con game they got going with prisoners. If you go to prison, you're running up a bill every day. Every time you want to read a book or make a phone call, make any kind of appeal, exercise your rights, oh, there's a fine here and a fee there, and you have to pay up before you can vote. How's that for voter suppression? I'm here today to tell you that we are not divided as a nation. No, there's just lots of shenanigans going on. Take this all away, Biden wins Florida, maybe even wins Texas. Georgia, there again, razor thin margins, 50-50, we're divided. Georgia, ground zero for voter suppression. God bless Stacey Abrams. She registered hundreds of thousands of new voters, and they squeaked out a victory down there. But yeah, Georgia, they got their photo IDs. They got their voters have to pay postage to request and then to send in mail-in ballots. Have to arrive early. Postmarked on or before Election Day, but arrive late. Nope, nope, not going to happen in Georgia. Reading now from publicintegrity.org. Georgia also mandates some of the country's most aggressive methods for purging voters from registration rolls. Republican election officials claim these tactics are crucial to prevent fraud, but have shown almost no evidence of fraud. Of course, because there is none, except for one or two here or there anecdotally. Voting rights advocates say there is evidence, on the other hand, that Georgia's methods of questioning voters' eligibility and purging them have disenfranchised black and other voters of color. Yeah, they got 100 ways to do it. We've seen the long lines, waiting for hours and hours and hours. You don't think that suppresses the vote? Georgia cut polling places statewide by almost 10%, immediately following that 2013 Supreme Court decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. So, not to get hung up on Georgia here, but the point we're making is that we're not a divided nation. Elections are razor thin because of voter suppression. And it continues right up until I saw this headline this morning. Republican state attorneys general are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to hear mail-in ballot dispute. Bogus claims of fraud due to mail-in voting, which have not been shown, which have not been proven, which are just being drummed up by the Republicans. Attorneys general from Missouri, Texas, Louisiana, Ohio, all petitioning the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn that Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision that allowed mail-in ballots postmarked by Election Day and delivered through the Friday after Election Day to be counted. So That's all they're ever doing, is trying to reduce votes, make it harder to vote. We're not divided. We're being attacked. So there's voter suppression. What else makes elections closer than they really ought to be? Misinformation and disinformation. If you've read any of the Mueller report or the various Senate committee reports or the news reports about them, we know the lengths that Russia went in 2016. Didn't get much attention, although they kept it up in 2020, didn't get a lot of attention. But who needs Russia? Who needs Russia when you have the Republicans? And it's not just the Orange Menace, it's every damn last one of them. The misinformation and disinformation campaign going on. This isn't your regular political spin we've all been seeing for the last 100 years. This is next level kind of Nazi Goebbels propaganda kind of stuff, real disinformation. I think the most hilarious political ads I saw on television were these local races where they would call some, local assemblyman part of the radical mob. There was one guy, they'd show his picture. I don't remember any names here. The Democrat was this kind of pudgy guy, white hair, a little goatee, glasses, wearing a sweater vest. Okay, he's wearing a sweater vest in the picture they use him. And this is a Republican ad with all the sinister music calling him part of the left-wing mob who wants to destroy the police and is in bed with rioters. It's just laughable. They took that ridiculous campaign that the Orange Menace was using on Joe. He's a part of the left-wing mob. He's against law and order. He wants violence in the streets. He wants to kill police. It's just the most ridiculous charges. And that trickled down to the local races as well. So this very innocent-looking, pudgy guy with a sweater vest suddenly is part of a left-wing mob. We're not divided. We're just being lied to constantly. The issues. And here, I think it's undeniable. According to recent polls, 80+% of Americans want to protect Social Security. They don't want to privatize it. They don't want to risk it by eliminating the payroll tax. Medicare for all, which the Republicans decry, and they've got Joe and the Democrats afraid of being vocal about it. But well over half, 60, 70% of Americans, not just Democrats, Americans favor Medicare for all. Protecting the Dreamers, that's up over 80%. Immigration issues, there's large agreement on how immigration should be handled in this country. And yet, it's nothing but a big old food fight among the politicians. We're not divided. They're divided. We're not divided. But our democracy is broken. So the will of the people, as expressed in poll after poll after poll, is not expressed then through their elected representatives. We're broken. We're not divided. We're broken. Paid family medical leave, 70+%. Universal background checks for guns, nearly unanimous. And we can't get that passed. We're not divided on major issues. In the most recent election, Biden surpassed the Orange Menace on nearly every single issue by wide margins. According to New York Times Siena College poll, 72% of Americans favor the Democrats' $2 trillion stimulus package. 67% favor a public health insurance option, which is Joe's position. 66% favor Joe's climate plan. See, when you ask about the issues, there's no division. 59% favor a national mask mandate. 55% favor the Affordable Care Act. Issue after issue after issue, Americans largely agree. And where they disagree, the win is still pretty big. Again, if you had a presidential election that wound up 60-40 in the popular vote, wouldn't you call that a landslide? 70-30, 80-20%, wouldn't you call that a landslide? That's where a lot of these issues fall. We are not divided. Now, this brings us to polls. Are we to suddenly not believe polling? That's another thing that's so popular these days. Now, polling is a big, messy, complicated thing. But pollsters and researchers have been doing this for decades and decades, and they get better and better at it. And people who are doubting the polls, I don't know what you're thinking. So the problem is, okay, well, Biden was up by 8% in Wisconsin, and he wound up winning by only less than 1%. One poll, and again, lots of different polls. There are going to be outliers. One of them had him up 17% in Wisconsin. Nobody believed that. But of course, the Republicans used that one poll to make their argument about how bogus the polls are. They choose the most extreme outlier to make their point. No, largely the polls had Biden up by 8 or 9. The final Marquette poll, just days before the election, had the margin down to about 5, as I recall. And he wound up winning by less than a percentage. Now, what's more likely? That every poll in the last 2 election cycles has been wrong, or that proven widespread voter suppression has come into play? Which one is more likely to you? People who just decry the polls, that's the anti-science crowd. And I'm really concerned that everybody's being pulled into that crowd. People on the left, Democrats, everybody in unison is saying how polls are so wrong. They're not. They're not taking into consideration these other factors: voter suppression, gerrymandering. I often use Wisconsin as the prime example because we are the prime example. According to Pew Research, Wisconsinites identify as Democrats at about 42%. Democrats or lean Democrat. Republican or lean, another about 42%. So equal. People who care not to answer or say they don't lean either way, one or another, at 16%. So I'm saying we're not a divided nation. I don't believe we are. Wisconsin is pretty evenly divided. This particular state is. But now here's the important thing to know. If we're a 50-50 state, truly, why is it we have 18 Republican senators to 13 in the state Senate? 18 to 13 advantage for the Republicans. If we're a 50-50 electorate in Wisconsin, why do the Republicans have a 63 to 34 advantage in the Assembly? Yep, you heard that right. 63 to 34 in favor of the Republicans in the Assembly, even though the voters split 50-50. That's gerrymandering. You don't think gerrymandering has an impact on the elections? Without all of this in play, we are not a 50-50 country. There are many other things in play here. Demographics play. Oh my God, the wide disparities in demographics. The less educated you are, the more likely you are to vote Republican. The numbers are very heavily weighted in that regard. The more religious you are, the more likely you are to vote Republican. Wide margins there. White voters continue to vote in large numbers for Republicans. So where there is division, it's not that tough to find it and define it. It's not just this simple, oh, we're a 50-50 nation. No, we are a very dynamic nation with lots of factors in play here. Now, that brings us to the Electoral College, which has gotten plenty of attention. Most of us hate the Electoral College. It's a remnant of slavery, and it's right there in the damn Constitution. Now, there's a good plan out there that I have to look into. I can't talk about it with any kind of authority or intelligence, except that I heard it on Democracy Now! And there's an initiative out there to get states to change the way they assign their electors, which would basically render the Electoral College obsolete. The states have the power to do this. I wish I could tell you more about that, but I'm not remembering how it works in the moment. We'll have to get back on that. But look into it. There's a really good program out there. So there are ways, if not to eliminate the Electoral College, because that is tough, it's in the Constitution, there are ways to just cut it off at the knees, to make it irrelevant. And that would be great. 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, the popular vote has gone to the Democrat. You know that, right? 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, starting back in 1992 and 96 with Bill Clinton, Then in 2000, Al Gore won the popular vote against George W. Bush. W's re-election in 2004 was the only popular vote advantage for a Republican in the last 8 elections. Then in 2008 and 2012, Barack Obama wins the popular vote. 2016, Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote by 3 million. And in 2020, Joe Biden wins the popular vote by 5 million plus and counting. So let me do a little math here. I can't do math in my head, so I'm getting my calculator out. All right, we are at 2020, right? The last time a Republican won, not counting that one exception by W, the last time a Republican won the popular vote was George H.W. Bush in 1988. It's been 32 years, you guys. With one exception of W's re-election in 2004, it's been 32 years since a Republican has won the popular vote. I'm going to say that again for the back row. With the one exception of W over John Kerry. Oh my God, what a terrible, terrible candidate he was. All right, so with that one exception, it's been 32 years since a Republican presidential candidate has won the popular vote. You guys, we are not a divided nation. We are not a 50-50 nation. It's not true. It's a myth. A friend of mine posted this. It distills it very nicely. It was a post regarding the getting rid of the Electoral College, and somebody defended it, saying the original argument that without the Electoral College, then small states and rural voters would be underrepresented. Okay, and her answer, those few have more than their fair share of an equal voice thanks to the Electoral College. Let's take California with 55 electoral votes and Wyoming with 3 electoral votes, for example. When you divide the number of electoral votes by the population of the state, you'll see that each Wyoming vote carries nearly 5 times the weight of one California vote. That's based on current populations. Why should each vote in Wyoming carry that much more weight than a vote in California? Yeah, a presidential vote in Wyoming carries nearly 5 times the weight of a presidential vote in California. Yeah, well done. Exactly right. We're not a divided nation. We are a broken nation. Our democracy is broken. We ourselves are not divided. Nope, that 50-50 razor-thin thing happens not by our doing. It's the result of a broken system. Or a very well-functioning system that's just not in our interest. I mean, you take the recent numbers. You take the most recent election. Approximately 70 million votes for the Orange Menace. Out of eligible voters, I've said once in the program that it's about 210. Then I read it was more like 239. I don't know. Round it out. Say 230 million eligible voters. 33%. It's about a third. Okay, let's just round things off. These are big numbers. So the Orange Menace got about 1/3 of eligible voters to vote for him, which means that Joe Biden got about 1/3 plus a little bit more of eligible voters to vote for him. So that leaves still about 1/3 of the voters who didn't vote. And if you compare the number of Orange Menace voters to the entire population of the United States, it gets down to about 20%. It's only about 1/5. So 20% of the American population voted for the Orange Menace, and you're calling us a 50-50 razor-thin nation? We're not. In this most recent election, if you take away all the things we've been talking about, the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, and all the rest, Joe's popular vote margin probably would have been doubled. I don't know. And much has been made about the gains Republicans made in Congress. Again, take away the gerrymandering, take away the voter suppression, all of that gone, those numbers would have changed as well. Democrats would have done far better. So getting back to the polls, these pre-election polls were, as far as I can see, very likely very accurate. If all the gerrymandering and flim-flammery had been eliminated, all of the really close razor-thin swing states probably would have been not that close. Florida, Texas, North Carolina probably would have gone to Joe. The post-mortem pundits are ignoring all of this. Suddenly gerrymandering and voter suppression are no longer a thing? Did we just forget about them overnight? You take them away, we would have had a massive blue wave as predicted. In Congress, in state houses, and it would have been a Biden landslide in both the Electoral College and the popular vote. I'm convinced of it. We're not divided. The Orange Menace said himself just a few weeks ago, and then Lindsey Graham repeated it just a couple of days ago, that under our current system, we're at risk of never electing another Republican president ever again. Well, yes. If we were able to fix these things, the Republican Party wouldn't exist at all. It's a high road to climb, man, but voter ID, early voting, voter registration purges, all of this, the sabotaging the mail, the rights of ex-felons, everything I talked about. We got to get in there and fix that stuff. The big reforms, election reform, a national holiday, ranked voting, things like that. All the misinformation and disinformation, this opens up a much bigger topic that we've talked about before and we'll talk about again. But we got to take money out of this thing. We got to take money out of the media. As long as the media profits from conflict, they're going to highlight the conflict. Oh, look, there's one group. Oh, and there's another group. They look about equal size. They're equally as loud. It looks like we must be a 50-50 divided nation. Of course we're not. Of course we're not. And everybody, all these talking heads, you guys, it's a lie. It's a myth. It's a mistake. We are not a divided country. And we'll be even less divided if we can fix our education system, get civics back in the school, if we can take the control of the debates away from the Republicans and the Democrats. That's another thing that creates this fiction of a divided 50-50 nation. The Republicans and Democrats have control of the presidential debates. We have to take that control away from them, get it back into the hands of the people. Talk about creating a fiction. And finally, we have to reach those 60 to 7 million eligible voters who even in this year, with the huge turnout, we still had that many who didn't vote this year. And if they weighed in, especially if we could turn them from low information voters to high information voters, if we could make it a national project to create high information voters, do you honestly believe that we would be a 50-50 razor-thin nation? With the Orange Menace and Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz on one side and everybody else on the other side, do you honestly think that we're a 50-50 nation? We're not. We are not. We're not. We're not. We're not. We're not. It's not true, you guys. It's not true. So that's my case. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong. All right. That's the log for today. This episode and every episode is available right now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Every single program available at charlesburcell.com. I invite you to go there, or Facebook or Twitter. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. Theme music composed and performed by Peter Donalds. All right, there it is. I'm Charles Burcell. See ya.